Three things woke me up that night: the smell of fresh tar, the way the moonlight hit the gravel like it was bleeding, and the sound a kind of hollow clack as something heavy struck wood. I pulled on a shirt, walked barefoot across the porch, and for a second I just stood there, listening, because you don't expect your life to change at 3 in the morning, not like that, not quietly. Then the headlights cut across my yard, and I saw at the driveway where my truck had always sat, the survey stakes we set 10 years ago, all gone, and a brand new asphalt ribbon where my gravel had been. Someone had paved over the line they didn't own. Someone had come and taken a piece of my life while I slept. My name's Jonah Reed. I like to tinker with old motors, fix leaky faucets, everyman stuff. Not a lawyer, not a lobbyist, just a guy who loves this patch of land because every tree has a story and every knock in the siding has a memory. Cedar Hollow, that's what I called the place before it had a name on a mailbox. I bought it with my own money, paid for the road into it with the same, and for 15 years it was mine in the way a place can be yours. Quiet on Sundays, a mailbox that only ever held good news, and the occasional seed catalog, a porch light that was always on for company. Then Lorraine Kessler moved in, with her glossy smile and a business card that smelled like polished wood and real estate ambition. At first it was small things. A complaint about my rusted mailbox, a polite note about community standards, nothing to rile a man who loves rust and all its honest dents. But then the nicer smiles stopped. There were demands, assessments, repairs, hidden fees attached to a newsletter printed in glossy white to make everything sound official. And in those leaflets, she slipped in phrases like common areas, community enhancements, and improvements for property value. Words that sound harmless until you realize they're a map to someone else's pockets. The actual theft, they called it a community initiative, and the letter left on my porch came with 2 men, orange vests, a backhoe, and the kind of efficiency that felt personal. Lorraine herself stood by the pickup, like a mayor at a ribbon cutting, sunglasses on, giving instructions. "We'll make this uniform," she said, as if my private access road were a rogue strand of hair. When I asked for permits, she smiled and produced a stack of papers like a magician. When I pointed to my deed, the one with the stamped notary and the phrase "private access easement" in heavy black ink, she folded the paper like napkin gossip and said, "Those old deeds get confusing, Jonah. We're modernizing." I tell you this because motives matter. Theft without motive is chaos, but theft with motive is a story. Lorraine was buying up a line of lots on the ridge above us, a patchwork of corners and small parcels. With the road paved her way, the county would call it a public improvement, property values would blink upwards on spreadsheets, taxes would inflate, and someone would make a tidy some selling access or paving rights. It wasn't about a crooked mailbox anymore, it was about a plan, and we were in the way. I could have stormed out like a character in a movie, fists and fury and a broken lawsuit on my tongue, but the smartest anger is patient. I sat with the deed at the kitchen table and let the silence fill the room. I started to trace the history not because I trusted the courtrooms or the men with orange vests, but because facts are stubborn things and paperwork can choke a lie. I found surveys, screenshots of county maps, the yellowing note from a 90-year-old clerk who'd once walked the lines in rubber boots. I called an old friend, Pete, retired county surveyor, the kind of man who remembers the difference between 1 inch and a lie, and he came over with his boots and his high-slung stare. We walked the property line together, and he tapped the ground and said, "This is your line, son. They paved over what they don't own." That's when the war of small cruelties began. Lorraine had a committee, a sheen of neighbors who liked the shine of a new entrance sign. They started asking for meetings, for dispute resolution, which in their world meant an evening of whispered accusations and handshakes that smelled faintly of grease. Flyers appeared on trucks calling me uncooperative. There were calls to my job, thinly veiled warnings that I was becoming a troublemaker. The mailbox that once carried seed catalogs began carrying anonymous notes. "Mix it up, Reed. This community plays by rules." I don't tell you this to get sympathy. I tell you so you understand that fear comes in small packages before it goes loud. Someone slashed the irrigation line in the garden. My neighbor's fence, a fence that had been a polite boundary for 20 years, was toppled one weekend with the neatness of a man who wanted to send a message. You're alone. You can be made inconvenient. You don't beat a small war with bravado. You beat it with evidence and people who care enough to stand beside you. So I did the only thing my hands know how to do. I got to work. I hired a land attorney with a patient face and a crosswalk of experience. I paid for a professional survey, the kind that prints lines like scripture. I set up a camera on a tree and left it running, cheap and ridiculous, because sometimes a cheap camera is the only witness you need when everyone else swears they saw nothing. We FOIA'd county records, then we FOIA'd the HOA's contractor bids. The deeper we dug, the more the neat little house of cards flapped in the wind. And then the human part of the story got ugly. Lorraine never got her hands dirty. She had a lieutenant, someone who liked the weight of authority, Mark Hollis, who smiled like a man who'd been given permission to be cruel. He caught me at the cul-de-sac one afternoon, over a paper cup of coffee I never finished, and he said, "You think you can stop progress, Reed?" It was supposed to be a joke. I answered with the truth. "I think you paved over someone's property." He laughed. "Property evolves," he said, and the laugh was a stone thrown. One night, as the legal filings stacked and the cameras hummed, Mark took it further. He came to my gate with two men, and they said they were inspecting drainage. An inspection shouldn't come with threats, and yet when Mark stood there and said, "You don't want to make this harder on your neighbors," I felt the world tilt. It was the kind of threat that doesn't have a sound. It's two men standing where they shouldn't, and the possibility they carry with them. I filed the incident, of course. I recorded the call. There's dignity in the paperwork, and the humility is that dignity's not flashy, but it's real. We staged a quiet counterpunch. Not fireworks, but stubbornness. We brought the surveys to the county clerk. We gave the camera footage to a local reporter who smelled a story. We organized a neighborhood meeting, not Lorraine's polished garden party, but a real meeting with neighbors who had seen the trucks and who, like me, were tired of polite smiles hiding private profit. People came: the woman who runs the bakery, the man who fixes boilers, the teacher who has a cat named Winston, ordinary people whose ordinary lives are the city's backbone. They brought testimony. They brought pictures of the crews at midnight. They brought the moral clarity most of us pretend to forget when the news is too loud. You want drama? There was drama. At the Community Beautification Fair, Lorraine took the stage to give a speech about unity and shared future, and I walked up behind the microphone with 3 boxes of evidence. The audience expected a complaint, maybe a yell. They got an order of documents, one after the other, laid out like cards tipped with a finger, signed contractors' bids, correspondence showing Lorraine's company communicating with development firms, receipts for improvements sent to shell accounts. You could hear a pin drop, and then quietly at first, then louder people started to ask questions. The county came. The press came. Lorraine's smile, which had been a polished thing designed to catch sunlight, started to chip. Some of her allies called lawyers. Others called their consciences. Mark Hollis disappeared for a while. Rumor is he found a job that kept him far from cul-de-sacs. When state investigators showed up and the phrase conflict of interest appeared in an email from the press, you don't need fireworks, you need slow, inexorable law. It has a way of moving like water through gravel, patient and relentless. In the end, there was no single cinematic arrest on my porch, no gavel crashing in a room full of gasped justice, like everything else worth having, arrived in paperwork and settlements and the quiet shuffling of files. Lorraine paid fines, resigned from the board, and for a moment there was a strange, hollow victory where I sat on my steps and felt both vindicated and tired. We recovered portions of the road, not all of it, and the county put a hold on the rest until proper hearings. We got a little money back in restitution, and more importantly, we got oversight, which is a small, stubborn thing like a fence and just as useful. But the story didn't end neat, the way commercials do. There's still a new sign at the development entrance, cleaner, brighter, and someone else's name on it, and some neighbors still talk about improvements like they're inevitable. There are cracks in places we fixed, small and steady reminders that vigilance doesn't end once the headlines cool. And Lorraine? She moved away, but rumors travel. She'll probably show up in another town with another plan. People like her do. If there's anything I learned, it's this. Property is more than paperwork, it's memory. It's the place you learn to fix a leaky roof and the sound your dog makes when he's hungry at dawn, and communities are fragile because they live between people with quiet decency and people with plans. When the scales tip, it's quiet folks who pay the price, and it's the neighbors who choose whether to line up on one side or the other. So tell me, what would you have done? Would you fight the asphalt with paperwork and patience, or with the kind of fury that gets a man on a truck bed at dawn? Who do we hold accountable when community improvements smell like someone else's gain? Drop a comment, tell me where you stand. Tell me about a time your neighborhood surprised you. And if you've ever had to stand up to something that should never have been taken, share it. If you like this, share it with someone who loves stories about quiet people doing stubborn things. And if you think I did it all wrong, well, say that, too. I'd rather have the conversation than be right alone.